And for the record, that's just reality.
With all due respect, we've got our own reality.
You can't... It's not a thing.
In the last episode of Fargo, the recurring idea of debt was front and center with the flashback to the Sin Eater. And this week we go a step further when the Queen of Debt, Lorraine Lyon, tells us that what she does, buying up debt that institutions have written off as uncollectible and then chasing after it, that's all done to improve the debt holders' lives. Because, after all, no one wants a handout. They want to fix things themselves. And echoes of that do appear to ring true when it comes to Dot, at least the part about fixing things herself, even if she doesn't recognize the debt that Roy Tillman thinks she owes him. Things in this episode pick up right where we left them, with Gator and his crew with their Nightmare Before Christmas masks descending on the Lion home, as Dot makes some last-minute preparations that include a smoking oven and Tiny Tim's version of I Got You, Babe. I had to go back and check, but she does actually play this in the background, which along with everything else she set up, really does create an unsettling atmosphere for the invaders. There's a brief moment when Gator notices the light bulb she put on the door handle and catches it, where you think they might be where the adversaries. But this pretty much goes like you'd expect it to after watching her set up these booby traps. The different members of his gang experience the worst of it, including the sledgehammer, bear spray, and a ladder from the attic. In the midst of things, Dot takes a swing at Jack Skellington with the zombie killer, and that leads to a face-to-face confrontation with Gator. She goes into mom mode and says shame on you before he tells her that, like it or not, she's gonna go back with him. My expectation in the lead up to this was that it would be comical, that this would be a really funny episode because of the improvised booby traps and Home Alone of it all. But in reality, it's all quite dark. Regardless, she does manage to get away thanks to a rope ladder in the laundry chute. The kidnappers find Wayne and Scotty hiding in the attic, but one of them gets trapped underneath the ladder, while Dot neutralizes the other. She tries to send Wayne and Scotty back down the chute, but he decides to try to escape out of their bedroom window instead and gets electrocuted by the trap she set there. Poor Wayne, who had no idea what to expect and just wanted to know why they were calling her Nadine, is out cold and the curtains go up in flames. They all make it out the window as the kidnappers make their escape, and then the fire burns the house down. She does avoid getting taken back to Roy, but her freedom does come with a hefty price, and it would be hard to consider this a win. Certainly not for Gator either, which is some consolation, I guess. He actually managed to do worse than Munch and his partner did during the first attempt. I mentioned the darkness, but it's also just plain sad to see her looking at this thing that had been established to be so crucial, so important for her to protect. The life she made in this house with this family as she watches it burn down. Back in North Dakota, Roy has his own problems to deal with. As he's orchestrating one home invasion, he's also becoming the victim of one. He doesn't know it's happening, but he is aware of the threat, so he retreats to his chapel because he's worried about Munch. And I suppose I should mention that we hear the character say his own name in episode 4, and he pronounces it Monk. So I do understand that this, along with Gator saying that he pronounces it Ulla, means that his real name is Ole Munch. But for now, I'm going to continue to call him Munch because that's what I've been calling him based on the spelling and the way the character was introduced in the run-up to the season. In this scene, Roy has a conversation with God that's pretty telling. He's talking about a horrible crime scene he encountered and says that he saw the devil himself there talking to the man who committed it. The telling part here is how he addresses God. He's not praying. He's not asking for divine guidance or intervention. He's talking to Jesus almost as if they're friends, or perhaps more importantly, equals. So not in the sense that he has a personal relationship with his creator, but more like they're colleagues. This will make more sense when we get to the scene with Munch in the bathtub. But for now, Roy returns to the house and finds the evidence that he's been inside his home. That amounts to a dead guard and muddy footprints that lead him to a cryptic symbol that's smeared on his daughter's bedroom wall in blood and mud. I tried to look this symbol up through an image search and didn't find anything that looked related. The middle looks like it could be crosses or letter H's connected together, and then maybe the half circles are references to the moon. I honestly have no idea about the symbolism, but the message is clear. I can get close to the people you want to protect, and you owe me. All of this happens in the first half of the episode, which leaves plenty of time to examine the immediate aftermath. Dot coaches her daughter on how to lie to the police, which is both frustrating and a great way to introduce her perspective on what's happening. In my notes I wrote down, explain to me why you're making these decisions like I was a 9-year-old child. I would say the answer to that is denial, but also the idea that she puts out there that if you follow the rules and think only good thoughts, that the kingdom of heaven will be the reward. Not necessarily a strategy, but something closer to what Danish is getting at later when he says, with all due respect, we've got our own reality. Dot's reality consists of an inability to accept her past life with Roy, all of what happened there and what goes along with that. So in that case, what do you do? It looks like her plan was to continue to live while keeping this ideal that she tries to achieve, hoping that it'll keep the other thing from becoming real again. The accent, the family life, and the Bisquick are all coping mechanisms, but we also see a genuine affinity she has when she finally sees Wayne in his room. I mentioned in my last video that Wayne was becoming a favorite character in this season, and the look on his face as he keeps repeating "my wife" in this scene is moving him up the list to be a favorite character of the entire series. Again, kind of frustrating, given that she's testing how much he remembers and essentially manipulating him into accepting her version of events. But it makes for an incredibly emotionally affecting scene, even though he's been shocked senseless and is absolutely loaded on pain meds. While I do think it's likely that part of this marriage came down to desperation and convenience, and things going off the rails currently is a direct consequence of her refusal to tell the truth, it's still enjoyably complicated. And I do believe saying she'll fix things comes from a place of sincerity. Wayne and Scotty might not be a problem, but the path forward is not without its obstacles. Even if you put the Tillmans aside, she still has to deal with her mother-in-law and deputies Olmstead and Farr. After they review the security camera footage, Whit and Indira know for sure that Dot was at the gas and go. So the question becomes, why would she lie about it? The idea of debt is reintroduced when Indira gets a call from a collections agent. Her money problems were introduced along with her husband in episode 2. And somehow I didn't put it together that this could connect her to Lorraine until we saw her interview with the writer from Forbes. Before we get to that, I just want to say that even though Indira's husband was as unsympathetic as a character could be in his introduction, I wouldn't wish a degloving injury on my worst enemy. The idea of that literally makes my skin crawl. As does Lorraine's explanation of debt and her justification that, well, actually, we're just offering empathetic solutions to people who just need a little help to fix things themselves. A lack of subtlety is something I've criticized this series for in the past, and I was in the camp who believed this character was a little over top in the first episode. But I have to admit that I loved this and her statements about the police in the last episode. I suppose it works because it's a counterbalance to the extreme violence and darkness surrounding Dot, plus it's funny while being true, and then Jennifer Jason Leigh is just a ton of fun to watch. She continues to be that when she storms into the hospital looking for answers about what happened to her son, demanding the Saudi package and opening the door for one of the funniest lines in the episode when the nurse reminds her they're not running a hotel. The problem with Dot's account of the events is that even if the kidnapping didn't happen, her story still doesn't make sense. And everyone there thinks the kidnapping happened. So Lorraine isn't buying the story, and neither are the two police officers. And I can't imagine after the fire marshal examines the scene that they'll buy into it either. As things close in around her, she does get a reprieve when Wayne wakes up, but she's going to have to answer some questions sooner or later. Roy may also have to do that if agents Joaquin and Meyer have their way. They believe that Sheriff Tillman did exactly what he was talking to Odin about doing in the last episode. He obtained weapons for his department and made them disappear so that he could give them to the militia. The FBI had an informant, but he disappeared, which is a common occurrence in Tillman country, We already knew about Dot, and there were accusations about a missing persons case in the article about Gator, and now we know that his first wife went missing too. The agents want to send a message and get a parable instead, and in the end they're told to make the most powerful sheriff in North Dakota, whose father and grandfather were sheriffs, and is connected to the most powerful militia in the Midwest, make that guy a hobby, something you do in your spare time when you're not punishing the actual criminals. It's not all bad news, though, because they did get a message about getting a hit on his second wife Nadine's fingerprints, which should lead them to Minnesota. Munch takes a bath and tells his new roommate / landlady / adoptive mother about when he was a child, which I did see after I finished last week's video that his childhood was confirmed to be over 500 years ago, according to Noah Hawley and the actor who plays him, Sam Spruell. They also confirmed that this is just a random woman who he moved in with, which I thought was the case, but the actor also laid out what he thought the character's motivations were. Very early on, he was banished from his own existence. He's looking for a home and someone to look after him. He's had to look after himself the whole time. There is no kindness or compassion shown towards this man. I think he moves in with that woman who's equally damaged, who's equally abused, in the hope that maybe there's instinctually a hope that maybe they can look after each other, that she can maybe be his mama. His monologue here is about freedom and how in his childhood it was a potato, because only kings had the freedom to want. And now everywhere you look you see kings. Everything they want, they call their own. And if they cannot have it, they say they're not free. There's a great cut to Roy at home as he mentions kings, and I could pretty much watch a whole episode of this. There's wisdom in what he's saying, which says he's not a mindless killing machine, and when his new roomie doesn't understand, but still wants to help, he just tells her he wants pancakes. To wrap things up, Roy pays the couple he offered counseling to in the second episode of Visit. Lenore has a fresh bruise on her exposed wrist, which says that her husband has not followed Roy's advice. And after the home invasion, this makes him the perfect candidate to step into the role of Munch and put the highway shootout investigation to bed and get all these other law enforcement organizations off his back. Of course, when he sits down in their mobile home, you have no way of knowing that's why he's there. And it takes a perfectly calibrated approach to provoke him into a suicide by cop. It also takes nerves of steel and an insane shot from the hip to the throat, and then it takes what seems like forever for this poor sap to bleed out. This is my favorite Jon Hamm scene by a wide margin so far this season, and it serves as a reminder of why he's a force to be reckoned with. Gator seems somewhat shocked, but understands the plan. And Lenore looks like she might be frightened enough and has a sense of owing him after this that she'll probably be able to keep the secret. Then the episode ends with a complete inversion of the good guy riding off into the sunset that looks fantastic. I really like this overarching focus on debt and this idea of people wanting to fix things themselves as a way to explain Dot's, or I guess Nadine's, unwavering commitment to denying things that are obviously true. Make no mistake, not everyone can afford to have their own reality. It's exciting that they front-loaded so much into these first 4 episodes, but that's also made it hard to imagine how things don't start crashing down on her really soon. I did do a rewatch before this season, though, and I think about how much season 3 picks up once Nikki Swango is sort of unleashed, so I'm not particularly worried about the season being one thing in the beginning and then something different towards the end. If there's one thing they made abundantly clear, it is Dot's resourcefulness and ability to work with whatever she has on hand. But with Wayne now out of the picture, it really is her against everyone, and they're closing in on all sides. And there is a power differential that exists here, while the show has gone out of its way to highlight this idea of power and exploitation. But more than that, the powerful's ability to make the exploited feel like it's all their fault. This is where the choice to make Lorraine's whole thing saying the quiet part out loud makes some sense, and how not pulling any punches makes it funny instead of tired. I mean, the other big laugh in the episode comes from her asking if they're on welfare when Scotty wants a Snickers for breakfast. Because part of the frustration of knowing people like Lorraine orchestrate consequences for everyone else while they're largely above consequence is that it's hard to imagine that ever changing. They seem less like outliers and more like a reminder of the way things are supposed to work. It can be hard to imagine how people like Roy or Lorraine would ever be forced to answer for their indiscretions. And I don't know, maybe that's where a 500-year-old sin eater becomes necessary. And I think that's a great place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.